Hello and welcome, truth seekers. It's time for another great video on our channel. Relax, perhaps with a cup of coffee or tea or something stronger if you need it, and let's get into it. Be sure to like and subscribe to stay updated with our latest content. You never think it's going to happen to you. Friends go through the pain of divorce for whatever reason. But because you trust and love your partner, you never believe that you'll end up being another statistic, another failed marriage. But when you look at the divorce statistics, particularly in the modern age, it actually leaves me wondering why people bother getting married at all. Till death do us part certainly rings hollow. Its meaning lost over the decades that I should have recognized the signs, I guess, but not due to anything I read online, whether it was stories, articles, or simply being more observant. When you're in love with someone, you generally have a blinkered, rose-tinted view of the world. When you're married, have kids, a home, and built a life together, the idea that you'd grow old together is what gives you peace of mind. But I guess the signs were there, and I'd seen them before. I grew up in what they eventually called a broken home. I thought my parents' marriage was strong when I was growing up. They certainly seemed to love and respect each other. My father worked hard for a living, a physically demanding job that took a lot out of him. But he loved his wife and family and sacrificed himself for what I guess you'd call the greater good. My mother returned to work once my youngest sister was at school. Being a kid, we had no real idea what was going on. But looking back, there were signs I'd soon recognize, and that's when I figured it all out. She didn't start having an affair straight away. I was a teenager when it started. My brother was 18 months younger, while my little sister was 3 years younger. It started like how many affairs start. First, it was working late. Then it was business trips away. Showers as soon as she got home from an afternoon spent with her lover. Dressing far nicer than she ever did for our father. And, as this was before the time of smartphones, secret phone calls and my mother disappearing at strange times for her liaisons. The only reason my father discovered the affair was that he walked in on them. I learned later that he was finishing work early, hoping to surprise my mother by taking her out for the afternoon, who told him she was taking half a day to get her hair done and do a little shopping. Instead, he arrived home to find her car in the driveway and a car he admitted to recognizing beside it. He parked up the street and walked home. Entering through the back door, he strode into the bedroom to find his wife, my mother, being ducked by her boss. In the marital bed, my dad lost it completely and beat the sheet out of him. His name was Jim Thompson, and he eventually crawled out of our house, battered, bruised, and bleeding. Despite the age, my father was someone who'd raised his children to never hit a woman. But how he managed to keep a lid on his rage that afternoon, I still don't know. Even he can't explain it. What my father quickly learned is that adultery meant absolutely nothing in a country where no-fault divorces were the norm. Some people state that possession is 9/10 of the law. My father tried to kick her out of the house, pack up her sheet and send her off to her parents. Once they learned what she'd done, they wanted nothing to do with her. Her sister also refused to take her in. As the house was also in her name as well as my father's, she refused to move. My father was stuck between a rock and a hard place. If he stayed, a divorce wouldn't be possible. A man and wife need to be separated for 12 months. That means living in separate locations before a divorce can be obtained. More than once, my father tried to have my mother removed due to her adultery, but it wasn't a crime and she was within her rights to remain in the house. Yeah, sometimes no-fault divorces suck arse, as there is a guilty party that caused the divorce when adultery is the reason, and for them to walk out of a marriage without being punished for breaking their vows does seem a little unfair. My father eventually gave in, not willing to remain in the same house with a cheating wife. He found an apartment and moved out. He couldn't find a place large enough to take all three of us, so we were stuck living with my mother. I had figured out what was going on and let my mother know immediately what I thought about her. She tried to explain her reasons, but I told her that as soon as I could, I'd go live with my father. My younger brother and little sister were not informed, so simply wondered why our father had left. I did my best to explain it without getting in the middle. The only good thing my mother did during that year was that she never stopped our visits with our father. Those first couple of months, he was a broken man. He did his best to put on a happy face for his children, but even we could see that the smile was forced. Being the oldest, He sat me down one evening after my siblings had gone to bed and admitted we were the only reason he remained nearby, but he would fight for custody and try and get the house if possible. It was a pipe dream though. Men were rarely given custody back then, and when it came to the divorce after 12 months of separation, it was required they attend court to sort out custody and other matters. As I was old enough to take the stand, I stated categorically I wanted to live with my father. But as my brother and sister were considered too young to make such a decision, though the judge would consider what they said, custody of all three of us was awarded to my mother. The only positive for my father is that alimony isn't a thing in Australia, though there is such a thing as spousal maintenance. However, that is not always awarded, and as our mother made good money anyway, he only had to pay reasonable child support. Unlike what it seems to be like in the United States, child support in Australia is reasonable on the parent no longer in the household, so my father wouldn't be left destitute due to child support payments. The next 4 years were difficult. I despised my mother by now, and she knew it. Any man she tried to introduce as her new partner, I let him know my mother was a hooer who'd cheated on her husband, forcing him out of the family home. More than once, I left her in floods of tears. By 16, we barely spoke and I was out of the house as often as possible. Whether at school, working a part-time job, or just not being there. My father did get his life back on track after the divorce, eventually meeting a lovely woman named Naomi, a fellow divorcee. I supported their relationship and she soon grew to love his 3 children like her own. She had a daughter of her own, and we treated her like a sister. Despite his heartache, I was pleased my father found love again, though I knew he hesitated getting married again. Naomi seemed to realize so was happy to cohabitate, the pair eventually renting a house together and establishing a de facto relationship. As soon as I hit 18 and graduated high school, I moved out of home to live with my father. I hated leaving my siblings behind, the only reason I'd stayed until that age, but by that stage my relationship with my mother was untenable. My last words to her were, I admit, incredibly cruel, but it was simply an explosion of all the negative thoughts I'd kept to myself since my father was forced out of home, simply due to not wanting to remain married to a cheating hooer. Despite our relationship collapse, she still sobbed when I packed my car the day I left. I hugged my brother and sister, assuring them I'd be close by and not forget them, before I glared at my mother one final time. My experience with my mother did make me wary when it came to dealing with women. I'd read a lot of articles about infidelity and I knew, at heart, I was a monogamous man and would expect the same from any partner. I did have a couple of girlfriends through high school, but once I was out working and making money, I started to date, hoping I'd find a woman worthy of my love and trust. I met Kylie when I was 21 years old. She was a recent university graduate. I was working as an engineer while taking night classes, as although I enjoyed working with my hands, I hoped to work my way up the organization into management. I met her at one of those corporate gigs. I was there representing the engineering company while she was working part-time as a sales representative for a supplying company. We hit it off immediately, and by the end of the day, I had her number in my phone with a promise to give her a call. Hot date, Mark? My roommate asked. He was one of my best mates from school and we'd agreed to live together so rent and bills were cheaper. Something like that, Dave. She that chick you met at the conference. Yeah. Finally get the balls to call her. I glanced at him and smirked. Duck off, Dave. I just waited a couple of days to not appear overeager. Trust me, she was rather excited on the phone when I did call her, and eager to meet up as soon as possible. Applying a little aftershave, I thought I looked okay. Better than looking like a bum. Anyway, though I had a decent job, the money still wasn't that great, but I was comfortable enough. We'd agreed to meet at a bar in town and go from there. I usually didn't do dinner and drinks on the first couple of dates. Too many stories of women looking for a free meal, the man who paid never hearing from the woman again afterwards. Walking into the bar after parking up my car, she was sat on a stool, and the first thing I noticed was the short skirt and her long legs. She was already sipping at a drink, meeting my eyes across the room. When her eyes lit up and she smiled, I think my heart started to beat a little faster. She had gorgeous blonde hair down to her shoulders, hazel eyes that sparkled in the low light, a gorgeous little nose and a pair of lips that were immediately kissable. She was rather slim with a small bust, though I'd noticed her pert little but when we chatted at the conference. Over a couple of drinks, we slowly got to know each other. Her role at the corporate gig had been temporary, admitting she'd only been hired due to having a pretty face so it would attract the men in her direction. She laughed, admitting it was true, but it left her feeling like a piece of meat. And so many married men were hitting on me, she added. It was disgusting. I saw her point. I know my own mother cheated, but both genders were just as bad when it came to cheating. Due to my own curiosity, I went looking online for statistics, and the fact so many men and women admitted to extramarital affairs left my jaw dropped in utter shock. What made it worse is that, according to plenty of articles based in Australia, we were notorious for being a bunch of cheating scumbags. You were the perfect gentleman though, Mark, she added, taking my hand in hers. You didn't try and check out my tiny tits or arse. You met my eyes the entire time and remained entirely professional. At least until you asked for my number. You were the only genuine person there. You'd better be single though. I placed a hand on my heart, raising my other hand. I swear I'm single. Ask any of my friends. She smiled and gripped my hand again. Good, because I've got a good feeling about you. I've been hurt before. We agreed to take things slow. We met for coffee or drinks for the first couple of weeks. It was the end of a third night for drinks that we kissed for the first time. By then, she knew about my parents' relationship. She hugged me tightly, and for some reason, it just made me feel better about things. When we kissed, I just knew it was right. Meeting her eyes, I was left feeling she was thinking the same thing. Drinks turned into dinner. Within a week, she was back at the apartment I shared with Dave. He had a girlfriend of his own and spent most of his time at her place, so thankfully he wasn't there. After sharing a final drink together, I took her by the hand and we made love for the first time. She was utterly gorgeous without anything on. Like any woman, she had some insecurities, particularly about her small chest. I assured her that her breasts were perfect, she had a fantastic body, and I just wanted to bite her arse constantly. Within a month, she confessed her love for me. I returned those feelings, and things took off from there. As soon as she found a permanent job, we discussed serious matters such as living together, buying a house, marriage, and then kids. By this stage, though what happened to my father lingered in my mind, Kylie had well and truly won my heart, and that was all that mattered. She was a delight to be around, and she admitted to wanting to be a wife and mother above anything. Before getting married, we agreed to buy a house together. Thankfully, this was before the housing boom that swept across Australia, particularly in Sydney. However, due to her lack of employment and a poor credit history, which she had told me about, she couldn't co-sign a mortgage. I couldn't afford one on my own, or no bank would offer me one by myself, so my father offered to co-sign so his wage would complement my own. I had no idea how much that would save my arse in the future. But for the moment, Kylie was ever so thankful to him, and she nearly wept when he told her that she was simply another daughter. Her parents absolutely loved me at the same time, so when I popped the question only 3 months after moving into our new home, everyone was delighted when we announced our engagement and the date of our wedding. Marrying Kylie was the best day of my life up to that point. I was marrying the woman I considered my soulmate, and she often told me that I was hers in return. Walking down the aisle towards me, I was probably grinning like a fool. She started to giggle when I took her hand as we were both overjoyed to finally commit ourselves to each other. It was no church wedding, taking place in a park, where a marquee tent was sitting nearby where the reception could take place. Our honeymoon was a week on an island in the Pacific. Sun, sea, sand, and endless segs. Little wonder we figured out that's when she fell pregnant with our first child. She gave birth to a beautiful baby girl 9 months after our honeymoon, and within 6 months of giving birth, she was ready for another child. 18 months later, she gave birth to our son. 3 months later, we agreed that 2 was enough. We both had what we wanted. To my surprise, she didn't want me to get the snip, just in case we changed our minds, and getting her tubes tied was out too. She simply agreed to go back on birth control, as it had never bothered her before, and life carried on as normal. She was a housewife and mother until both children were at school. Once our son was at school, she resumed employment, though kept her hours to school times until both our children were in secondary school. Only then did she return to complete full-time employment. By the time we both hit 45, I was now a regional manager for a national engineering chain. I did travel every so often, but rarely more than one night away from home. Kylie was established in her career in real estate, managing her own office, though would occasionally report to head office in the CBD. Our daughter, Charlotte, had moved out of home to live with her boyfriend. He was a lovely young man who was already devoted to her. I assumed wedding bells loomed on the horizon. Our son, Stephen, was still at university, living in a share house close to campus. I was aware of his different sexual interests, but Kylie and I supported him no matter his choices in life. We'd been married over 20 years by now. I thought we were still as in love with each other as the day we'd exchanged vows. My eyes had never been turned. Hand on heart, I might look at another woman, but never considered doing anything, as I'd given my heart to Kylie, and I didn't want to destroy that trust. But I couldn't help it. What happened to my father always lingered. I should have known better. I should have seen the signs. But when I finally realized the truth, I knew I'd have to take certain steps to prepare myself for the inevitable. You just never think it's going to happen to you. You think she's cheating on you? Dave asked, hearing the surprise in his tone. Mate, she loves you to death. What on earth? I've been blind, Dave. I thought once Steve left the house, our relationship would return to what it was before. And for a few months, she couldn't get enough of me. Honestly ducked me into a coma more than once, and I left her a sweaty, red-faced mess after making her own nearly all night. But I'm starting to see similar behavior to the sheet my mother was pulling on my father. Just thinking about that whore still caused my blood to boil. I'd barely seen her in the past 20 years. She had attended my wedding, and that was only due to my father intervening. He'd married Naomi by then and had well and truly moved on. He told me to be the better man and invite her. I didn't have to involve her, but not inviting her would make me look like the bad guy. I grit my teeth and sent her an invitation. Other than that, apart from updates about grandchildren, who she rarely had the chance to visit, I'd had nothing to do with her. Kylie knew the story and never pushed for any sort of relationship with her either. So what are you going to do? Get any evidence I can. And if she is cheating on me, I simply walk away from her. How will you do that? I have ways and means. She'd been more secretive than normal the past few months. I should have noticed earlier. My own stupid fault, but that's what I get for trusting her. Once I realized what was going on, I guess it was too late to stop it, so I've been preparing myself for the inevitable. I have a meeting on Monday morning with a private investigator. All I want to know is if she's doing the dirty. I don't need to see photos and video, though anything that will help my case. Shame you can't divorce on grounds of adultery in this bloody country. While true, a man can protect himself if he's smart and protects himself early enough. Thankfully, she's waited until the kids were out of the house before cheating. And there are one or two things she'd forgotten about our life that might turn things in my favor. He patted my shoulder.
I'm sorry, mate.
I really am. I sipped at my beer. So am I. Thing is, until I have confirmation, I can't stop loving her. Maybe it's just my suspicious mind. Maybe I'm just being a jealous bastard. But the signs are there, mate. I was oblivious until I finally realized what was going on. The next morning, I drove to my father's place. Naomi greeted me as always, asking if she could sit with him as I explained the situation. I must have had a look on my face, as despite it being only 10 a.m., he placed a bottle of beer in my hand, told me to take my time before I started. I smiled when he took Naomi by the hand. They were still in love as much as the day they'd married. The de facto relationship hadn't lasted long before my father wanted her to be his wife. I think Kylie is having an affair. Naomi gasped. My father muttered, duck. Not again. I'm going to hire a private investigator on Monday. But all the signs are there, Dad. The same signs you told me about, Mum. All the signs you told me about. If she is cheating, then she'd certainly read the playbook on how to get away with it. But once I pulled my head out of my arse. What do you want me to do? I grinned. Naomi giggled, as I'm fairly sure it wasn't a nice smile. Dad, I'm going to give my house to you. Remember how you co-signed that mortgage agreement years ago? Kylie has never placed her name on the deed. According to law, you and I own the property while, once I'm gone, she'd be considered no more than a tenant. I'm selling you the house as a gift by simply removing my name from the deed. According to state and federal law, I can do that for free. And what do we do then? I sign a month-to-month rental agreement with you. As soon as I pull the plug on our marriage, if it comes to that, you can sort things out with Kylie. Though she will have some form of tenant rights, due to living in the property for an extended period, we'll read up so you can legally evict her with a court order if required. Unfortunately, due to the plan I have in my head, I won't be around for it. You've given this some thought, Mark? Naomi wondered. Kylie and I discussed monogamy and fidelity before we married. She knows about my mother. I warned her that if she ever cheated on me, I won't forgive her. I don't care if it's 1 time or 100. You sleep with someone else, you break the vows we took and therefore break the marriage contract. At least the no-fault bollocks means I can leave rather easily, and I won't have to pay her a cent. No child support as they're out of the house, and no spousal maintenance as she earns as much money as I do. Thank God we don't have those ducked-up alimony laws like some places in the States. Duck giving some cheating which part of my wage just because she can't keep her legs closed. I took a sip of my beer and glanced at Naomi. Sorry, I'm a little pissed off about this. I just hope I'm wrong. Returning home, Kylie was in the living room, curled up on the couch, watching a movie. She smiled at me as always, her eyes lighting up at my appearance. Where have you been? She wondered. See my dad. Just needed some advice about something. Oh, what? A work thing. Might be a new opportunity on the horizon. The problem I felt is that I only had suspicions, no concrete evidence that she was doing me dirty. And if she was having an affair, it was someone she didn't see every day. I knew the day that girls' nights happened out of nowhere would be one of the straws to break the camel's back. But so far, there was nothing like that. There was the occasional late night working, but I had those too. If she was suspicious, she'd think I was cheating on her on those rare nights I worked late. Heading to bed that night, she snuggled into me as always, whispering how much she loved me. It hurt my heart to think that she was lying to me. Maybe she loved me but needed something or someone new. If that was the case, we'd divorce and she can have that new fellow. I'd read some fictional stories about wives who, for whatever reason, turned into massive slots, ducking multiple guys, participating in glangblangs. The idea my beautiful wife would participate in such things nearly made me gag. Until I had evidence, I had to trust her. It was the old saying of trust but verify. So when I whispered back that I loved her, I still meant it at heart. But the idea she was breaking our vows was almost too much to bear at times. The next day was Monday. I was out the door for work first. Every morning we'd have breakfast together. Then I'd brush my teeth, and I'd always receive a kiss on the lips. A proper kiss too, not those pecks married couples seem to do after years of marriage. That morning, it was the same, her eyes sparkling as she told me she loved me and wished me a good day. I almost felt guilty, knowing I'd be meeting a private investigator at lunchtime, ready to put my wife under surveillance because I believed she was now cheating on me after 20 years of what I thought was a happy marriage. I was a little surprised that I was met by a woman. I was expecting an ex-cop with a grudge against women, dressed in a trench coat and fedora. Guess I watched too many old movies. She noted my surprise and smiled, explaining the process, what was on offer and how much it would cost. Will she notice money being moved? No. We've kept separate accounts but have a shared account where we pay for bills and other household things. What makes you think she's having an affair? I explained what I saw when my mother was doing the same thing, then what my father discovered, what my mother then admitted, before explaining the current situation. How is your seg's life? She finally asked. Once my son left home, we were at it like rabbits. But around 6 months ago, it slowed down again. I thought it was just we got everything out of our system. Truth be told, I'd be intimate with my wife every damned night if I could. Just because I'm 45 doesn't mean I'm no longer interested in sex. Have you noted changes in her behavior? Yes, they're subtle, but they are there. Know the term red flags? She nodded and I grinned. Not quite enough for a communist parade, but there are enough red flags that I'm allowed to be concerned and suspicious. She explained what they could offer. It includes phone tapping, video surveillance, personal tracking, and all manner of activities, some she admitted that might not stand up to scrutiny, which meant they would be considered somewhat illegal. I had to explain that it wasn't a constant affair, unless my head was completely buried in the sand. I had no idea if she met someone at lunchtime, or if working late was when she did it, or just those occasional dalliances where she just wanted some different segs. I had to admit that I simply didn't know and I just wanted the truth, that I was given a little time to think about it. Letting them know I'd call by Friday to start the surveillance for the start of the next week. It was difficult refusing segs with my wife. I still didn't know the truth, but the idea I was now sharing her with one or more men was a complete turn-off. I could have feigned illness, but I went with the truth. I simply wasn't interested. I know it upset her when I rebuffed her advances. She finally asked if I was stressed with work. I was stressed about something, so grunting my agreement seemed to satisfy her curiosity. She snuggled into me as always, whispering that she loved me. I called the Wednesday, asking them to start immediately. I needed to know, as it was starting to drive me mad. I was left wondering if it was all in my head. No wonder so many spouses on the receiving end of being cheated on were left mentally scarred by it. In the end, though I paid for their services and they did discover incriminating evidence, it took only a month of rebuffing my wife for her to finally show her true colors. By this stage, I was reading literature every day about cheating spouses, whether men or women, all the signs of cheating, how they go about pulling the wool over their eyes, and also what spouses can do once the marriage implodes. I was already prepared. I had already started moving things into my car, and I had what I called a bug-out bag. Work knew I was getting ready to move. I just needed to give them a date. My father now owned our house outright, the rental agreement not making any mention of my wife. She would find herself turfed out within a couple of months with any luck. It was a Friday night. I returned home at my normal time. I'd usually find Kylie in the living room watching television, nursing a glass of wine when I walked in the door. We'd generally order in some takeaway, talk about our week, perhaps discuss plans for the weekend, snuggle together, and then make our way to the bedroom. Before she started acting differently, Friday night was usually a great night with the kids finally out of the house. We'd make love constantly, sometimes barely stopping until Sunday. Instead, I heard her busy in the bathroom. I almost laughed to myself. The situation was so cliché. Grabbing a beer from the kitchen before perching myself on the couch. You never think it's going to happen to you. I waited in the near darkness before she appeared. I was expecting a slotty little black dress. Instead, she was wearing a colorful blouse and a short skirt, stockings, and heels. She'd styled her hair, applied some makeup, jewelry accentuated everything. She was a knockout. Shame it wasn't for me. I knew it wasn't immediately. Oh, Mark. I didn't know you were home. I got home at my usual time, Kylie. You were obviously too busy primping and prepping yourself for whatever you're doing. Where are you going? She took a deep breath. I'm going out tonight, Mark. With John from work. Why? It's just a work thing. That was a barefaced lie. I knew who he was. He was the affair partner. He worked at the head office of her company. He was married with kids of a similar age to both of us. I'm not sure what she was expecting me to say, but there comes a moment when a man will simply wash his hands of a situation. If she was expecting me to plead or beg, she obviously didn't know me at all. She knew my stance on monogamy and fidelity. Standing up, she met my eyes as I walked towards her. I glared at her and she eventually shrank back. I smiled as I walked into the kitchen. Are you not going to say anything, Mark? Nope. She wouldn't have a clue how prepared I was. I guess we were both good actors. Only difference was I wasn't tearing her heart out with all the lies. Okay, fair enough. I'll be home later. We can talk then. I didn't say anything, but I did follow her to the door. She stopped and looked back at me, looking as unsure as I'd ever seen her. Whether it was guilt or not, I didn't know and no longer cared. Good night, Mark, she said softly. Goodbye, Kylie. She should have realized what I was saying, but I guess she thought I was just going to be another man I'd read about who'd put up with such bullshit. But I was no cuckold. I wasn't going to tolerate that sort of bullshit. I had no interest in an open marriage, sharing my wife, and God help those men who enjoy watching their wives being ducked by others. Talk about emasculating, humiliating, and a complete reversal of the vows taken when being married. As soon as she was gone, I put my plan into operation. I got online and thanked the heavens that everything could be done through a phone app or online nowadays. We had very little debt, only a credit card each, which I immediately paid off and canceled. I paid any bills that were coming up, then moved most of our savings from our joint account to my own account. I left her enough she could pay a month or two of rent and the bills. After that, she was on her own. Possession is 9/10 of the law. She didn't own the house, and I would be long gone by the time she realized our savings had disappeared too. Walking around the house one final time, I couldn't help sigh. So many good memories now tainted. Grabbing another beer, I had 3 calls to make. The first would be easy. The last 2 would be difficult. Dad, it's confirmed. She's cheating on me. She had the gall to admit she was going out with another man tonight. The plan goes into effect from this moment. Where are you going? Adelaide. I've got a new gig there for 12 months. Once the divorce is final, I might return to Sydney, but it's a case of wait and see. Okay, son. I'll make sure she doesn't learn where you are. New number? I'll sort that out once I get there. I'll send you my new address once I found a place to live. Drive safely and don't do anything stupid. Dad, all I'm doing is walking out on a cheating spouse. Unfortunately, like father, like son rings a little hollow this time. You did nothing wrong, Mark. Just find peace in what you're doing and you'll soon move on. Just know that Naomi and I love you. Do your kids know? I'm calling them next. Good luck, son. I'll talk to you soon. Calling my children was the most difficult 2 calls I made in my life. I called my daughter first. She would always be Daddy's little girl. When I explained the situation, she cried on the other end of the phone. That's what hardened my heart. Hearing my little girl sob because her daddy had been left heartbroken. I assured her I would always love her, but for the time being I was going away. I would email her all my new details once I was settled, but for the time being, I wasn't going to tell anyone that I asked for my son. He showed the stoic attitude I'd expect from any young man. He called his mother a slut, and the only question he had of me was what I was going to do with it. I'll figure out where he lives and send it to his wife. I admitted. She deserves to know the truth. Other than that, I have no desire for revenge, Steve. This isn't fiction, it's real life. I'm heartbroken now, but all I'll do is wait it out until the divorce and then somehow rebuild my life. I'm only 45, 46 when the divorce is granted. What about counseling? Can she demand it? Marriage isn't like that here, nor are divorce laws, Steve. You've been reading too many stories based on laws in the States. As long as we're separated for 12 months, I can apply for divorce. As you're both over 18, I won't even be required to attend court, though I will, just to ensure it goes through. She can't request counseling as we've been married 20 years. Well, I'd be careful, Dad. You know what courts can be like. If she pleads her case enough, then I'll just take my evidence to the counselor, place the photos in front of them, and ask if they'd remain married to a woman who cheated on them. Okay, Dad. Well, look after yourself and keep in touch when you get to wherever you're going. I'll keep you up to date as I reckon Mum will come to me. She knows Lottie will protect you. Thanks, Steve. I'll talk to you soon. And that was it. I wrote a short letter to Kylie, explaining that I was leaving and that she would soon hear from my father. I didn't tell her why. I'd leave that as a little surprise. Other than that, I explained that I had already called our children and told them the truth, as did my father. She was welcome to tell her parents that I'd left, but if I started receiving abuse or pleas to reconcile, I'd send them the evidence. My final act was to remove my wedding ring and place it on the coffee table with the note and all the evidence I'd received. They were copies, as the originals would remain in my possession, in the event I'd need to use them for any reason. Getting into my car, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but I did find that all the stress I'd been under disappear as I pulled away from the house. I'd booked a hotel on the western edges of the city in preparation for my drive to Adelaide. I had 2 weeks to get there and organize my life, so I wasn't in any rush, thinking I'd stop at the occasional country town. where there was little more than a pub, a post office, and a police station, usually all in the same building that I arrived in Adelaide a week later. Heading to the office I'd be working out of, I was greeted by a couple of people I'd recognized from previous corporate conferences. I already knew my role, so knowing I was a stranger to their city, they took me out and showed me around, suggesting areas I should consider living. I ended up living in a hotel for a month while I organized a place to live. I eventually selected a modern 3-bedroom apartment in North Adelaide, having done my research and found it to be one of the nicer suburbs of the city. I wasn't interested in buying, as the average price was expensive, though not as bad as Sydney. My intention was to eventually return home to Sydney after 12 months. Once I'd moved in and changed my number, I informed my father, siblings, and children of my change in circumstances. Charlotte was immediately on the phone wanting to visit. I'd missed her terribly, organizing a flight for her within the month. My son was completing his studies, but as Christmas was only 3 months away, he would visit me then as he could stay for a few weeks. As for my father, he let me know what was going on with Kylie. You're aware she didn't arrive home until the next morning? Yes. I didn't pull off the private investigators until the next day, as I was wondering what she did that night. She went out for dinner with him, and it was all rather romantic. Then they spent the night at a hotel in the city. I didn't need to know much more than that. I thanked them for their efforts and paid them, as their services were not necessary after that. Well, I've heard through the grapevine and also what she told me. She got home to find your wedding ring, your note, and the evidence. She called me, your children, and her family in hysterics. You obviously didn't answer your phone, and I know she sent you emails too. Any call from her went to voicemail and was deleted. I marked any email from her as spam. Well, that was just the start of her problems. I turned up on the doorstep a week later and showed her the rental agreement we'd signed. Then I showed her the paperwork about you gifting me the house. Her face paled as she realized it was all entirely legal. I gave her 3 months to find suitable accommodation, and if she doesn't leave, I'll have the police evict her. She's still living there, but I know she's looking to move out. Has she asked about me? Of course. She's asked family, your children, friends, even your place of work. The guilt is eating at her because she's thrown away 20 years together. Has she explained to anyone why? Not really. She's sorry, of course, but I heard the same sheet from your mother. She was sorry that she was caught, not sorry she was cheating on me. Cheaters always live in a fantasy world where they believe they're not doing anything wrong. The usual bullshit is that it was just sex. I do hate to leave you hanging, lovely viewers, but worry not, since I will be back before you know it to give you the next part of our tale. In the meantime, be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next part of our story. Be safe, and I'll see you in the next video.